It's funny how the mind works, how it clings to the smallest details when everything else is falling apart. I remember the smell of the coffee house that night, warm bread, bitter coffee, and the faint tang of cleaning solution. I remember the way the summer sun lingered on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. I remember the sound of my shoes crunching on the gravel as I left work, the weight of my bag slung over my shoulder. I should have taken the bus, but it was such a beautiful evening and the walk home wasn't far. Just a quiet stretch of road, flanked by fields and the occasional farmhouse. I'd done it 100 times before. It was safe, or so I thought. The first thing that struck me was the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the low hum of the wind. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, quickening my pace. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, but the road was empty. Just shadows stretching long in the fading light. I told myself it was nothing. My imagination running wild like it always did. But the footsteps grew louder, closer. My heart started to race, and I glanced over my shoulder again. Still nothing. Then I saw him. A man standing at the edge of the road, half hidden by the trees. He was too far away to make out his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Isabel," he called out, his voice low and steady. How did he know my name? I didn't wait to find out. I ran. My bag slipped from my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding against the gravel. I veered off the road, cutting through a field, the tall grass whipping against my legs. I thought I could lose him. I thought I could make it home. I was wrong. He caught me just as I reached the edge of the barn. His hand clamped over my mouth, his breath hot against my ear. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. He dragged me inside, the smell of hay and damp wood filling my nostrils. The barn was dark, the only light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. I could see the shapes of old tools hanging from the rafters, a rusted tractor parked in the corner. He threw me to the ground, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I tried to scream, but his hand was still over my mouth, his grip like iron. "Don't fight," he whispered, his voice calm, almost soothing. "It'll be easier if you don't fight." Easier for who? The next few hours are a blur. Pain. Fear. Darkness. He tied me up, his hands rough and calloused. He kept doing things I don't want to remember. I begged him to let me go, but he just laughed. When he left, I thought it was over. I thought I had a chance. I tried to free myself, but the ropes were too tight. My wrists were raw and bleeding, the coarse fibers digging into my skin. I screamed until my voice was hoarse, but no one came. And then he came back. I don't know how long it lasted. Time doesn't mean much when you're trapped in a nightmare. But I soon realized I wasn't going to make it. The look in his eyes cold, empty, devoid of anything human. Just as despair threatened to consume me, I caught a glimmer of movement outside the barn door. My heart raced with a flicker of hope. Maybe it was someone passing by. Maybe they'd hear my muffled cries. My kidnapper quickly picked up a rag from the floor and shoved it in my mouth. It burned. I wanted to cough, throw up, but I couldn't. I could barely breathe. He hastily secured the rag with tape, stood up, and left. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, reached my ears, each one like a drumbeat in my chest. They were coming closer, so close I could feel the air shift, the weight of someone's presence just beyond the rotting wood. I pressed my face to the crack in the door, my breath shallow, my whole body trembling with the surge of hope that threatened to overwhelm me. My mind screamed for me to call out, but I knew it would be a mistake. They had to find me quietly. The footsteps paused. My heart thudded in my throat. A shadow passed by the crack, large, looming, and so close I could almost reach out and touch it. My fingers twitched with the desperate urge to signal, to beg for them to hear me, but I held back. I waited, barely breathing, as the world seemed to hold its breath with me. Then, the sound of someone crouching down right outside the barn, their hand brushing the door. My pulse surged, my thoughts spiraling. This is it. This is my chance. Through the small gap, I could just make out their silhouette, a figure, a person. So close. A flash of their eyes, searching, darting over the barn, the intensity of their gaze sending a rush of fear and hope through me. Were they looking for me? Could they hear the faint rasp of my breath? They had to see me. They had to. But then, without warning, a sharp crack sounded, like the snap of a twig. I wanted to scream, but my voice was a choking lump in my throat. I couldn't see what happened, but I could hear the collapse, the sickening thud of someone hitting the ground. I wanted to shout, to throw myself at the door and beg for them to keep coming. But I could do nothing. My limbs were frozen, my heart shattered in an instant. And then, I heard its footsteps again, but these were heavy, measured, and unmistakably familiar. The barn door creaked open with a groan. The familiar sound that had once been my terror, now the harbinger of my complete loss. I could feel him before I saw him, the coldness that radiated off him, the predatory stillness. He stepped inside, and my heart froze. His eyes met mine, dark, merciless, like the void itself. I tried to shrink back, my breath ragged behind the cloth, but he stepped closer, and I knew with the sharpest clarity that it was over. The hope, so fleeting and fragile, shattered like glass. The pain that followed was almost a relief in comparison, a quiet surrender to the hopelessness that had finally claimed me completely. He knelt beside me, his face inches from mine. I could smell the sweat on his skin, the alcohol on his breath. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch almost tender. "You're so pretty," he said, his voice soft. "It's a shame." A shame? What did he mean? The last thing I saw was the blanket. He wrapped it around me, his hands surprisingly gentle. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. I was too weak.